In media, framing is one of the most salient concepts. Framing means selection and emphasis. As stated by the scholar Robert Entman, it's about selecting certain aspects of a perceived reality and making them more salient so as to promote a particular problem definition and interpretation, making viewers perceive a given issue in a certain way, even if it means not giving the full picture. This is true for MSNBC's coverage of Vance's recent speech in Munich. The framing begins in the headline, "Fear and Scolding in Munich. Vice President Vance attacks US allies." Fear, scolding, and attacks are all terms with negative connotations, so the question is, does MSNBC's coverage of Vance's speech justify a sensational headline like this? Welcome or welcome back to the channel.
As Vice President J.D. Vance prepared to speak to European leaders at the Munich Security Conference today, many of those leaders were likely expecting to hear about the Ukraine war and the importance of unity between allies. Instead, what they got was this.
Throughout this video, Katie Fang consistently shows her bias through her intonation.
Instead, what they got and the
importance of unity, Fang says. As we're about to see, the way Fang, and particularly one of her guests, scold their political enemies, to use their own term, scold, shows that unity isn't exactly their top priority, to put it mildly. Also, unity is merely a platitude, a slogan, one that's dependent on each individual's interpretation of it. There shouldn't be unity at any price. It's the specific policies, goals, and ideals that unite people that matter. For instance, if a given country's government brands itself on being pro-freedom of speech, but actually silences its critics, how can other governments, who are in fact pro-freedom of speech, have unity with that government? Maintaining unity shouldn't be at the expense of telling the truth, like, you shouldn't say that because we need to have unity, which exposes the weakness of Fang's criticism. It's like someone saying, what you're saying is divisive, so no one should listen to what you have to say. That's not an argument, that's a value judgment. The fact that a statement's divisive has no bearing on whether or not it's true. Besides, everything can be interpreted as divisive depending on your political stance. There's an important difference between arguments and value judgments. Vance's speech is 20 minutes long. MSNBC plays 50 seconds of it. Do these 50 seconds really count as scolding, attacking, and making the audience fear?
Instead, what they got was this.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration.
With me tonight, former FBI Special Agent Clint Watts. He's the General Manager for Microsoft's Threat Analysis Center and an MSNBC National Security Analyst. And Nayyar Haq, former White House Senior Director and former State Department Senior Advisor. My thanks to both of you. Clint, you're in Munich. Thank you for joining us. I'm almost scared to ask. I feel like I'm going to be embarrassed for America in asking, what was the reaction to Vance's speech?
I like how Fang lets Watts speak freely and doesn't ask loaded questions. And this isn't only about instructing Watts, it's also about guiding the viewers what to think about the 50 seconds they played, guiding them to think that it's embarrassing to consider migration an important issue. So much for unity with the people who voted for Trump and Vance.
And the importance of unity.
But wait, didn't Vance talk about shared values?
Values shared with the United States of America.
He couldn't be saying something unifying, could he?
One of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And now it's time for all of our countries, for all of those who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples to use it wisely to improve their lives, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them.
But we can't have anything ruin MSNBC's Unite or Divide tactic. It's critical for views and popularity.
I think the tone in general, Katie, is just remarkably different than last year. I was here a year ago, and so wildly different perspectives. I think for the Europeans, it's a bit of whiplash between like last year, looking back 3 years ago, where we're really unifying and rallying around Ukraine, to a perspective that is much more about domestic politics in each of these countries and what the outcomes of different campaigns might be.
I like the forced indignation on Fang's part, still instructing viewers what to think about Vance.
General, Katie, is just remarkably different than last year. I was here.
What's his mention of the tone and his repetition of Fang's word unity are more value judgments as opposed to arguments. A different and less unifying tone has no bearing on the potential truth value of Vance's statements. Were Vance's statements really as unexpected and uncalled for as MSNBC desperately tries to make it seem? Vance and the other leaders were in Munich for a security conference, a city where a literal security breach had just occurred. I wonder why MSNBC didn't include that part.
And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you. We're praying for you.
To what's his credit, though, he's a lot more objective, more simply observing than Fang and Huck, who are a lot more subjective and act as if they're insulted.
You know, Naira, though, you get this 1-2 punch of Pete Hegseth, you got J.D. Vance, and this is the first opportunity for Trump 2.0, the second administration, to show our allies how we're going to approach Europe. It's got to leave a bad taste in any type of ally's mouth when they see and they hear the messaging that's coming out of this administration.
Now Fang can't even mention their names without acting repulsed.
Pete Hegseth, you got J.D. Vance.
Way to guide Huck what to say. Not that Huck needs any guidance, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Actually, Vance spoke in terms of we and our. His speech wasn't only about how the US is going to approach Europe. It was about what he considers to be the right approach to democracy, for America as well. Whether or not he was right is a matter of opinion, but to say that he only attacked and scolded European countries is a disingenuous oversimplification. So approaches should only be positive. Is that it? No one should remind or reprimand anyone about anything. How does that kind of unity benefit anyone?
It's got to leave a bad taste in any type of ally's mouth.
No, not in any type of ally's mouth, as Fang says, overemphasizing MSNBC's resistance against the current administration. She doesn't just say any ally, but any type of ally. It depends on who you ask. Many and probably most European leaders and politicians didn't like Vance's speech, but that doesn't mean that the citizens in European countries dislike the speech. More and more European citizens vote for political parties with firm immigration policies. When self-proclaimed experts judge or shame a given politician, people who support that politician will often feel judged and shamed as well. How's that for unity?
And the importance of unity.
Huck refers to herself as a highly respected communications expert, and she's a professor. However, does her response live up to these credentials? Judge for yourself.
Now, they did anticipate that Trump would sell out Ukraine, probably not this quickly.
Sell out is what other people would call holding both parties in a conflict responsible. That's why it's not the terms that matter, it's the definitions of terms that matter, and Huck doesn't give us any. I'm glad that someone who's a professor is being so objective and goes into so much detail. Must be fun being a truth-seeking student in one of her classes.
Probably not this quickly, but they also probably did not anticipate that the Trump administration would actively weigh into their domestic politics. J.D. Vance also talked about how, the need to speak for the will of the people. He completely ignored the elected leader of Germany in favor of meeting with the far-right opposition group. So apparently, elections matter as the will of the people only when Trump and people he likes around the world win.
That's a big conclusion based on scarce data. As a professor, she should know that this is an irresponsible way of arguing, especially considering that both Trump and Vance have met with political leaders and people they disagree with. Vance meets with a party in Germany that Huck doesn't approve of. And somehow that means that the current administration thinks that elections only matter as the will of the people if politicians they like win. Sure. In a recent poll, 1 in 5 Germans said they'd vote for AfD, the party in question. Thus, Vance meeting with this party is indeed the will of the people, or also the will of the people. So it sounds more like Huck wants Vance to meet with people she agrees with, which is exactly what she accuses Vance of doing. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has urged a firewall against AfD, so from a freedom of speech perspective, it makes sense for Vance to meet with people whose voices the Chancellor is actively trying to silence for self-benefit. Like Fang, Huck relies more on shaming adjectives and intonation than arguments in order to play on people's indignation.
He completely ignored the elected leader of Germany in favor of meeting with the far-right opposition group. So
far-right has been certain people's go-to term for more than a decade when talking about people they supposedly disagree with. In rhetoric, such labeling is known as complexity reduction, as it saves politicians and distinguished professors from making arguments and dealing with their opponent's arguments. In theory, that is, because some people see through it. They can use complexity reduction to make dishonest statements like, "Why would I meet with an extremist? Why would I debate an extremist?" Oftentimes, the people who are the busiest proclaiming how much they love unity and inclusion are the ones least likely to actually do so.
Actively weigh into their domestic politics,
which other people would call giving specific examples. Unfortunately, many politicians do everything they can to avoid specificity. Instead, they use oversimplifying labeling and general vague platitudes like this.
That we have so much more in common than what separates us. As I like to say, seeing in the face of a stranger a neighbor.
Yes.
Right? An extension of love thy neighbor, that you literally in the face of a stranger see a neighbor.
Yes.
These are catchphrases that are designed to tickle people's ears, but they don't have any substance as they're devoid of pragmatic solutions. One of the specific examples Vance gave was this.
I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content.
A specific example of the worries that many citizens, not political leaders, but citizens have, that they can't voice their opinions. But large media companies don't like specificity.
Particularly around hate speech in the company.
What hate speech are you talking about? To describe a hateful thing.
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction.
Can you name one example?
I honestly don't. You
can't name a single example. You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
Content that will solicit a reaction. That's hate speech. I'm curious, does that broad, nonsensical definition go for his side as well? Excerpts like these show that it's all about virtue signaling, saying the right words in order to keep their jobs, hate speech, misinformation, and so on. Words that this so-called journalist simply presupposes, when instead he should be attempting to prove what they mean. All slogans, no substance. It's ironic that Fang and Huck talk about the will of the people, when clearly there are many people whose will they don't want anyone, and especially not vice presidents, to focus on.
And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution.
If seeing someone perform a silent prayer affects you, maybe that's a sign that you're not about to make the right decision, contrary to what society tells you. Just an idea. In the UK, protests outside these clinics are illegal. But what is legal, apparently, is for the country's prime minister to refer to a simple biological fact as toxic, not define what he even means by toxic, and do everything in his power to avoid giving an apology to the person who spoke the simple truth. Let's watch.
Women.
If you start with biology, then why did you say about Rosie Duffield saying only women have a cervix? You said it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right.
Well, look, what I said then and on other occasions is simply that I do not like the way that this becomes so quickly a toxic conversation. It must be possible to have this conversation without sinking into a toxic conversation.
So do you owe her an apology?
Well, I don't want this to go back into this toxic place where everybody is divided.
Would you say sorry to Rosie Duffield for the way that she's been treated?
Look, Rosie Duffield and I get on very well. We discuss a number of issues.
I like how the Prime Minister uses fake-sounding, positive platitudes to divert attention from the fact that he can't substantiate his deceptively oversimplifying labeling. Yes, there are indeed problems in European countries. The examples Vance mentions are the tip of the iceberg. In Denmark, which is where I'm from, a man recently got a suspended sentence for sharing alleged offensive jokes online. Jokes that people literally told in the 90s. So people haven't changed, but the laws that govern people have. None of that is part of this coverage. No reflections, no background, no perspective, nothing but presuppositions and easy conclusions.
Bringing up this idea of migration, there's another irony there. Germany actually welcomed Syrian migrants to the tune of 1 million because they had a massive labor shortage.
First of all, it wasn't Germans, as in German citizens, who welcomed so many migrants. It was Angela Merkel, the chancellor at the time. And today, Germans aren't so happy with the results of Merkel's irresponsible slogan, "Wir schaffen das." That's the first thing Huck conveniently leaves out. The second thing that's inaccurate is that it was about labor shortage. As Merkel herself said, if we start having to apologize for showing a friendly face in emergencies, then that isn't my country. Showing a friendly face has nothing to do with labor shortage. In my country, it was the same pathos-appealing rhetoric.
Because they had a massive labor shortage. So we're seeing this idea of migrants, brown people moving across borders coming up as a very scary, demonized tactic, when the reality is it's a significant labor challenge for many countries, including in the United States. That's why people are coming and are employed. Brown people moving across borders coming up as a very scary, demonized tactic.
Again, Huck relies on intonation as opposed to actual arguments, exposing her academic immaturity.
Very scary.
Who's demonizing whom? It's telling that the word tactic is on Huck's mind, because she herself engages in a tactic here, misdirection. Huck is deflecting attention away from the problems that unchecked migration also causes. She doesn't mention the cultural differences and crime rates, things that many people find concerning. Instead, she ridicules people who find the outer characteristics of the migrants scary, which is intellectually dishonest and also untrue, as most people are able to talk and work together, no matter what they look like. Who's really being divisive here?
And the importance of unity.
It's a significant labor challenge for many countries, including in the United States. That's why people are coming and are employed.
No, not always. Far from it. The migrant crisis in 2015 is a counterexample to that.
You know, Clint, something else that J.D. Vance said in his speech that I really want our viewers who are tuning in to understand and to be aware about is Vance scolded countries for shunning parties, as Nair just mentioned, that are seen as extreme. And then Vance went a step further by actually meeting with the leader of the AfD. The AfD is the German far-right party, and he meets with this leader 1 week ahead of Germany's own election. Let's be clear, this is a party that was kicked out of a group of European far-right parties for being too extreme. This is who America's representatives choose to break bread with. This is who they choose to spend time with. But I really want our viewers who are tuning in to understand and to be aware about is...
I believe her. That's what's important to her. That's what she gets paid for, to give viewers a certain understanding of different political issues, the epitome of unreliable information. MSNBC's priority isn't to give different perspectives or offer well-argued opinions. No, they want viewers to have the same interpretation as them. That's why Fang mentions the viewers before she even says what Vance said and did. As always, she relies on intonation and labeling as opposed to argumentation.
Let's be clear, this is a party that was kicked out of a group of European far-right parties for being too extreme.
The intonation and labeling are there to shame people who might have a different opinion in a don't think outside your group type of way. Not one word about why this party is supposedly extreme. Compared to two of the parties that are popular in my country, AfD has much less strict immigration policies. So which scenario is more likely? That about half of a country's population is extreme, whatever that means, or that extreme is merely a subjective word that means different things to different people? I mean, what if someone finds the rhetoric of Fang and MSNBC extreme? There's an important distinction between naming and defining. Naming is when a speaker makes claims without giving grounds, such as, he shouldn't be allowed to express his extreme views in this company. Here, many people would automatically think that it's true that extreme views have no place in a company. Definitions, on the other hand, contain grounds such as, his views are extreme because he thinks there should be coffee in the coffee machine. Now, no one would agree with his views being extreme. Thus, unlike naming, definitions allow for the audience, us, to be the judge of what's being said, to evaluate the strength of the arguments. MSNBC deliberately doesn't give us that chance. Instead, they engage in a guilt by association tactic. Guilt ascribed to someone, not because of any evidence, but because of their association with an offender. Someone being Vance and the offender being AfD. There's a lot more to say about this so-called interview, MSNBC and other media companies, but this will have to do for now. Until next time.